get started, I would like to introduce our special guest today, our very special guest, David Robinson. And I got to know David quite a long time before I actually met David, because I met a number of his publications. So this is one of the first ones. I got this for 65 cents in a used bookstore. It's called Hollywood in the 20s, and it was a very well-written book. It was a very well-written book. I went on to find other books of his that I didn't even know were written by the same person, but of general interest. This one is called The History of World Cinema. So as you can see, he was already prepping for his magnum opus on Charlie. And at a certain point, of course, he did do his magnum opus. Before we even get to that, these are books from the early 70s and even late 60s, the great funnies. I hope you're impressed that I assembled all these, David. I did not buy them just for this session. Chaplin, The Mirror of Opinion, about the public response to Chaplin over the eras. Beautiful little fancy, it's like almost a coffee table book, but in miniature with a lot of color illustrations, called Charlie Chaplin, Comic Genius, for somebody who doesn't have the commitment to actually read a full book. A passion book called Movie Icons, a series. And one of my favorites is this book that David wrote, one of the early books you could find, aside from Rudy Blesch's biography, his wonderful biography, and Buster Keaton's own book on Buster Keaton. And what about that? I think it's one of the best book covers ever done for the Indiana University Press in America. A lovely picture and a lovely book. And of course, David's magnum opus, which is his great work, 1985 book, Chaplin, His Life and Art. And before we get started with David, I would like to take just another moment myself to read you from somebody else's book. This is one of the first books I ever read about Charlie. You won't know it from this dust jacket, because the original title, Chaplin buffs among you will know, was The Great God Pan, by a man named Robert Payne. And Robert Payne essentially puts Charlie, a lot of these chapters aren't even about Charlie. They're about the great god Pan. They're about Indian sort of witch doctors, dancers, magic makers, mirth makers. They're about medieval clowns. It's about Dickens. Talks about Sweeney Todd. He talks about Heinrich von Kleist and his famous weird short story about marionettes, on the life of marionettes. It's a very poetic book that puts Charlie not in the usual tradition of other comedians, but in the great tradition of the primal impulse of laughter and madness, in a sense that his films embody. And like many authors, Robert Payne came back to this book for future editions with new prefaces. And in this case, he had a new afterwards. He wrote the book in 1952. It came out about the low point of Chaplin's reputation in America, but it did sell enough to get reprinted as a paperback. And he writes a little afterwards, and I'm going to read you a little bit about that, a little bit from that. In 1964, when I first got hold of the book, when I was a child, he says, there were life-size wooden cutouts of Charlie outside the cinemas with the totally unnecessary inscription, "He's here again." We used to wonder at the inscription, for he never seemed to be very far away. We learned later that the inscription, like nearly everything else about Charlie, was traditional. It was the cry of Grimaldi, and for all we know, it was the cry of Shakespeare's younger brother, who played the part of a clown. Now, nearly 50 years later, I keep hearing the cry again, as Charlie returns to favor. Why there should ever have been a period of disfavor is as mysterious as everything else about Charlie. He is certainly here, and this time he has come to stay. We may be grateful that times change and that Charlie remains, the sweetest, humblest, and most gentle clown who ever walked the earth. And by way of finishing my introduction of David, I would like to tell you that one of the things that instantly cued me in when I first got hold of his massive book was the opening inscriptions. One was a quotation from Charlie's autobiography, and the other was a review that he plucked out of an obscure newspaper from 1915 about Charlie it was written early in 1915. This guy was actually there on his first day at Esnay, the reporter, and he said this wonderful phrase. This is, don't forget, Charlie had only made The Keystones by this time. None of the other films that most people would consider the great films, but already this guy was perceptive enough to say, as David quoted, and I know it by heart, those big shoes are buttoned with 50 million eyes. And with that, let me introduce you all to David Robinson. Hi, David.
Hello. You know, you've shown us those books. There's some terrible stories about some of those books. I'll just tell you one of them, that is The Great Funnies, which is often quoted. But how The Great Funnies got to be written is this. The publisher, every half year, did a series of 4 books. There's one book about theatre, one book about film, one book about something, and they rang me and they said, oh, we've got to publish in 3 weeks or something, and the character hasn't delivered the film book. We haven't got a film book and we have to publish the 4 books. Can you do us a book in a week? And I said, not easily, but it's short. And that's how The Great Funnies came to be written.
You wrote that book in 1 week?
Yes.
There's a lot of pictures in it, but it's one of those great, in America, this was published by Studio Vista Dutton, and those of you who love
Studio Vista, yes.
And they called it Picture Back book. Very beautifully designed little.
But I had to write it to plug a gap. Well, I didn't get much sleep, and actually, you know, I'm quite pleased with the book in the end. And then there's another book which you showed, which was Chaplin, the Mirror of Opinion.
Yes.
I'd signed the contract to publish the big book, the big book. And then a publisher that I hadn't had anything to do with for about 10 years said, I've got to publish that book. I said, why? Well, because I've got a contract here saying that you're going to do a book about Charlie Chaplin for me. And I paid you £100 for this. I said, yes, but that was for a series which collapsed. The series is no longer, doesn't matter. I got this contract and you have to do this for me. So I went to my lawyers, he went to his lawyers, everybody. And the lawyer finally said to me, it's quite difficult. He's got this damn contract. I think the only thing you can do is to write a book about Charlie Chaplin for him. Well, how can I write a book about Charlie Chaplin? So I had this idea of writing a book which was just about what other people had written about Charlie Chaplin. And I had a very, very bad case of the flu. So I was confined to my bed and I sat there and I wrote the book. So those are 2 books I'm not very proud of, which were forced upon me. No, I'm not very proud of The Mirror of Opinion. It's not bad, but
well, we got a message.
It's actually quite nice because I did some quite tough research and I did find a few people who had been completely forgotten and now getting remembered. And they say, oh, the first time this is remembered is The Great Funnies. So I'm very pleased with that. In the end, I'm quite pleased with all of them.
In fact, one of our attendees, Uli Riddell, who you know, the wonderful film archivist from Germany.
Yes. Hi. Hello.
And I love The Great Funnies. So, you know, there you have it from the horse's mouth.
Well, that's very good, Uli, because that's because somebody else didn't deliver. So I had to knock that up quickly.
Circumstances. I think people would be interested in knowing, because of course many of the people will be familiar with a number of your books. We have some real film buffs attending today. But I think, you know, your career, you had books almost going all along, but your career preceded your life as an author. You became, you were a journalist and you became the film critic for the Financial Times first, and then it was the London Times, right?
Yes.
Could you give us a little rundown on how you got to do those things? I mean, were you born to the manner born, as it were, in a journalism family?
No, not at all. I had to find something to do, and well, it was a long story how I came down from Cambridge without a job, and I applied for a job at the British Film Institute, and I didn't get it. But one of the people interviewing me was the great documentary director, Basil Wright. And he said, I'm sorry you didn't get the job, but would you like to have a job with me? And he paid me very, very little to work just as an assistant for him. He was doing a film, and then I couldn't really live on £4.50 a week. And so the British Film Institute said, oh, we've got a job. And it sort of went from there. I got a job on the British Film Institute's magazine, Sight and Sound. And then accidentally got a newspaper job. And it just went like that. Chaplin is an older story, though. That I don't personally go back quite that far, but it did begin in 1914. When my father was a schoolboy in the provinces, he was in 1914. He was 14. I'm getting a funny echo. I hope it's not. You're not, are you? Anyway, no, yes, he was 14, and he and his friends went and sat in the front row of the pictures every week, and they suddenly discovered this new comic who they liked very much. They didn't bother to know what his name was. They called him Dummy, and the kids would say, "Hey, there's a new Dummy at the Regal tonight," and they go and see it. And then they discovered his name was Charlie Chaplin. And so 1914, my dad sees Charlie Chaplin and is devoted to him all life. So by the time I can see or talk, I have to go and see Charlie Chaplin. I go to his pictures. I think it is. I went to the pictures very, very early. My first visit was when I was 3, but it is just conceivably possible that I saw Modern Times when it was new. For sure, I saw the Dictator when it was new, and everything thereafter. So it's quite a long story. It's 106 years we've been watching Charlie Chaplin.
I'm so glad, though, that you didn't call your book Dummy, His Life and Art, because I don't think it would have been as well received.
And, I don't know. It depends. If Dummy had gone on, he'd have done all right, even if he hadn't taken on this name.
Yes, I made a reference to
He'd have done all right. Yeah.
One of Charlie's early rivals, pre-Charlie really, was Pimple, of course, quite popular British comedian that you talk about in your history of world cinema. And in fact, I know Barry Anthony, the wonderful historian, is working on a biography of Pimple now.
Oh, really?
Yes, yes. So
I better not say it. I never admired Pimple very much.
So associated with classic films, and particularly with Chaplin now. Well, first of all, I'd like to take a little tangent to say that this is a program of the Niles S&A Silent Film Museum's Chaplin Days, which I wish I could say I'm coming to you. This is the first of our weekend Chaplin Days program that is live. We are live. And I wish I could say we were coming to you from the Edison Theater at the museum, but of course, safety first.
Yes.
In Chaplin's case. And so in fact, we're all online for the first time. And so many thanks to all the wonderful people at the museum who sponsor this and many other great events all year long. It's become not only a wonderful resource for people who live in the region, but also a center for the preservation of the great S&A heritage, which is beyond Charlie. It was Bronco boy G.M. Anderson, Gilbert Anderson, who came to S&A in 1912, I believe it was, and made hundreds of. He was the first cowboy star. For those of you tuning in who don't know why there's a name called S&A, I'll even say that. Although many of you listening, forgive me, will know this. It was cobbled together from the initials of the founders, a man named Gilbert Anderson, A, and George K. Spoor, S. And they simply spelled out their initials, S&A, E-S-S-A-N-A-Y, and formed this pioneering film company, which has the great honor, it probably would be a little more, lesser known now, although it was an important pioneering film company. Had Anderson not seen the Chaplin films and decided he was worth making a real big gamble on. And that gamble was, he offered him $1,250 a week when no other SNA actor was getting more than $75 a week, which was a very good salary in 1912, 13, 14. And so just a little background of where we are coming from and our gratitude to all the people, most of them excellent volunteers who I've had the pleasure of meeting over these last few years. So back to you, David. Go ahead. You want to add to that?
I have a special feeling for SNA because you've done such a lot of things with my beloved baby Peggy. There.
They have.
Yes.
And you may not be aware because it's a relatively recent development. It's happened all along to some degree, but they have now got the equipment to do full-scale restoration, and people from all over the world will say, I found this a trunk full of nitrate, and will you do something with it? And David Keane, who with his wife Rena are the bedrock of this museum, is now able to optically to transfer them digitally, optically, every which way, and so the legacy isn't being lost, thank heavens. And it's owing to people like you that the legacy is not being lost, obviously, as well, because your book did a great deal to turn many people on because it got so much attention to the legacy of Chaplin. But I must ask you, before we even get into talking about how you came to write this particular book, you were a journalist for years before that, I presume, reviewing contemporary films, and yet you're so associated in our minds with the classic heritage. You were the director, were you the founder of the Pordenone Film Festival in Italy?
I wasn't founder. I came in, when I came in, I don't know, it was in its 12th year or something like that, but I did change it quite a lot, and I directed it for almost 20 years. Everybody said I should have stayed on for 20 years, but I think I did 18 or 19 years. Yes, and I'm still very much involved with Pordenone, and I'd love to have a much closer relationship with Niles because of all the things you do.
Well, and for those of you who don't know, Pordenone is one of the world's premier silent film festivals devoted to world cinema. So silent films have been uncovered, recovered, and shown there from Russia and from every country in the world, not just the ones that we Americans tend to think of as silent films because of the prominence because of the fact that we're ugly Americans and only think that our culture is worth attention. And so you were, but my question to you, David, is during these years when you were a working stiff journalist, was it a little frustrating to have to review the contemporary film world, or did you find that quite engaging before you plunged into the deep world of movie history and became, in a sense, an historian as well as an author?
No, I very much enjoyed my years as a critic. It was very interesting, but strangely now I'm very old. I don't go to see many films. Well, I go to see silent films, yes, but well, when you get old, strange things happen, and I've sort of regressed to the silent period, I think.
So I know there's a tale, and as there is with Kevin, your dear friend Kevin, getting access to Charlie's outtakes and unknown film footage, and making his brilliant breakthrough documentary, Unknown Chaplin. I'm speaking, of course, of the other great film author and documentarian, Kevin Brownlow. And you, around the same time, embarked on the task, I believe, of writing this, because you were the first author, correct me if I'm wrong, who was ever given access to the vast archives that Chaplin had kept, from literally scrapbooks going back to his childhood, as well as all the records of the studio that had been kept. How did that happen?
Well, it's a story. There was, I would have to look up the dates, but there was a reissue of Limelight, and I reviewed it for the Times, And I did a very long review, and because my other big interest was the vaudeville theatre and the music hall, because of that, I had a lot of background and things like that, and who was the sort of origin of this character. It was quite a long review. And so the review came and went, and then at the new year, to my great surprise, I got a Christmas card. And I thought it was somebody having a joke with me, because here was this Christmas card sent to my, I think even sent to my correct address, from Charlie and Una Chaplin, with a little note at the bottom saying, "We loved your review of Limelight." This was a delightful shock, but I never just dropped things, and so I did call Miss Ford, their dragon of a secretary, Miss Ford. Everybody was scared of Miss Ford. I did write and say, "Oh, thank you so much," and so that was that. And but somehow I kept in touch with Miss Ford, and again, to my big surprise, the next thing I heard was the day that the Queen made him Sir Charlie Chaplin, the investiture where she put her sword on his shoulder. That morning I got a telephone call from Miss Ford saying, "Oh, tonight we're having a little party at the Savoy. I mean, nothing grand, it's just only just family, but we wondered if you'd like to come." And I said, "Yes." Can you imagine? And so I went to this party, and he was already very old, and he had aphasia. It was difficult. He couldn't reliably respond, and so it was really all the family. And so none of the family bothered him, and he was sitting alone on a sofa, and I just sat with him for an hour or so. And a lot of the time he just looked, he was just silent. But he would say, at the same time, suddenly there would be a burst, and it would be very articulate. And there was this wonderful moment when his eyes were watching. I mean, he was very alert, although he couldn't really communicate. He was very alert, and his eyes were watching a little boy. I never discovered who the little boy was, because one of the family, a little boy with bright red curls, little red curls all over his head. Charlie was fascinated by this boy, and the little boy sort of came over and stood in front of him, and Charlie reached out and played with the hair, and the little boy turned away and ran away again. And again, Charlie watched him, and having been completely without speech, he suddenly took my arm and he said, "You see, they always gravitate to the mother." I thought, goodness, this is quite a sentence to come out of him. Huh. And then 2 or 3 years after this, Miss Ford rang me again, I think, and said, "Oh, tomorrow, Saturday, Mr. Chaplin is going," no, Sir Charles, by this time, "Sir Charles is going to be at the Anvil Studios supervising the recording of the music for A Woman of Paris. Would you like to come?" "Yes, please." And so there we went, and there was Charlie, still not speaking, still aphasic. We were sitting in a little box with a window into the room where the orchestra was. And I had the same experience. Una and Miss Ford went off, so it was just him and me sitting there, with him not really saying anything, but watching. And again, there were just the odd burst. I said, "Did it take you long to write the music?" I talked as if he was listening, and suddenly he said, "Not long, inspiration mostly." And he was gone again. He was very beautiful. This handsome old man, beautifully dressed, and not just communicating in these bursts. It was so. This was a great privilege. And then after that happened, I was kept in touch with with Lady Chaplin, thanks to Jerry Epstein, who was a friend and finally the producer. And Jerry said, you know, you've spent so much time on his films and things, you ought to sort of write something. Well, I'd like, and yeah, and then actually I think that he said that before I met them, and I said I would love to write a book, but everything's been written, and only maybe if I could talk to you. And after he died, Una said, Charlie said you could write the book. I don't think he did, but she said that. And so I went to Vevey, and I was blessed. You know, I'm really blessed. It's, you know, the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, well, I think we would all agree that it's a great thing in all of our lives who love Charlie Chaplin and love cinema, period. Not only because it's a splendid portrait of him and so deeply researched and lovingly written, but because it's an example of what a truly great biography should be. I happen to have a copy here in German, and you know, quite often I'll read it to go to sleep at night because I don't speak German. But I was hoping you could read several passages from it for us. Would you mind? Not now.
I want to tell you the best translation, the best foreign translation, the German one.
Is that so?
Yes, marvelous translator. I mean, he knows more than I do about Charlie Chaplin now. You know, he's so into every point of it. Yes, I keep on. The trouble is, once you get hooked onto Charlie, you're doing it. I mean, I wrote a book 2 or 3 years ago about Limelight. I've just finished one. Goodness knows when it's going to get published, with all these things that are going on, these distractions. But the book was on the freak, which is really, you know, if we think of it as a script which was never made, it wasn't. It went so close to being a film. The studios were booked to shoot it. And then at Christmas 1959, 59 or 60, Jerry Epstein, who was going to produce it, went to Vevey, and Una said, there isn't going to be a film. I think that he had, his health had deteriorated, and she knew that he could not really cope with a film. And I think something had happened, because it's strange. He didn't seem to react to the fact that suddenly there was no film, even though they'd had the studios. They'd postponed the studios from October to February. So I've written. Obviously there's the script there, and the script went through many versions. But I hope that I've arrived at the one which, for him, was the definitive one. And it's a very interesting, curious script, and it would have been a fascinating film. It was made to star the wonderful Victoria Chaplin, and she was the freak, or was she a freak? Who knows? This girl appears in Chile, of all places, and suddenly this girl appears who has wings. She's a beautiful, wonderful, beautiful girl, but she has wings and can fly. And it's a very complex story, and a very sad story. There's inevitably there's a lot of comedy in it, and some nasty characters, but a tragic end. But it's a fascinating book. So there's that book. There's the script is there, and a whole discussion of how. And what is interesting in Chaplin is how he begins with an idea and how he works on it and develops it. I mean, obviously, when in his early days he was doing this on film. In his later days, he couldn't do it on film, but he was trying. I think that in his case, the definition of genius is that you know when it's come right. And with his scripts, as with the early films, he would work and work and work at something, do it again, try it again, do it, and then suddenly he knows it's come right.
You know, we've had a question from one of our attendees.
Yes, I want to read these.
And,
yes.
This person asked, if you were to do a revised edition of your book, what would you want to include in it that you didn't include already? Would there be more things, or do you stand by? Well, let me first of all give one of the revelations that I was looking forward to giving today, which is that as David Robinson's beautiful book on Chaplin is the gold standard of Chaplin biographies, this Penguin edition, this is the way it looks in America, I believe this is the American edition, is the gold standard of David's book, because he was able to revise this one in, what was it, 2001, I believe, and add a second preface to it. But there are substantial revisions. So those of you who love Chaplin, those of you who love David's book, this is what you want to find. And you can always find it on YouTube. It's no longer in print, I don't believe. Is it, David?
I think, I've got a feeling it is. I haven't followed it up, but Penguin said, "Oh, you know, we bought this because we want to specialize in films in books that can stay in print." And I said, "Oh, that's jolly nice." Yes, so they stayed in print, and about 18 months later, they remained at it. They didn't tell me they're going to remain, otherwise I'd have bought a lot of copies. But then they reprinted it. I think what happens is that the publishing firms, well, big publishing firms like Penguin, change their direction and they change their policies and things like that. Anyway, I have a feeling it is still in print.
Well, this
if you go on Amazon, I think you can buy it new.
You begin with your new preface saying this started out 18 years ago as a long book and is now even longer. For an author who cherishes brevity, this is a matter of concern. But in Chaplin's case, discursiveness seems justified. And you go on to talk about how you've got new information on Hetty Kelly. I think you have recovered, there have been some new photographs that have turned up, as well as the FBI, Charlie's short but evidently quite wonderful relationship with Louise Brooks, which she wrote about eloquently. He never said anything about it publicly, and other changes. So since this book has appeared, are there other? Well, let me ask another question, because perhaps it will answer the attendee's question. Most authors who write a biography of a subject, especially a substantial one, do what Robert Payne did, and a future edition will get a new preface or an afterword, but they don't go on to write a whole pile of completely new books on the same subject. What do you think it is about the subject of Charlie Chaplin that has kept you so fascinated, so enthralled, that you have been so prolific as a contributor to our knowledge and to the understanding of Chaplin, and as well to the celebration of Chaplin, because of many of these books, like the little this little souvenir book, I can imagine this being a lot of Christmas stockings for film buffs to turn on new audiences to Chaplin. What is it about Chaplin himself, you think, or his work, that has kept you in that fold, or is it simply a matter of money for you?
Huh?
It's simply greed.
Greed to write other books. No, I've only ever willingly written the one book about Chaplin. The others have been sort of pushed on me.
Mm-hmm.
I've never. Yes, I mean, no. I very willingly did the book on Limelight, and the new book on The Freak. You know, I was asked to do them by the Bologna Cinematheque, but I'm very happy to do those. But the others, I mean, if people have got a series of books, oh, we have to have one on Chaplin, you know, so will you do the Chaplin one? And I think that only little things, but you do find the extra detail or something like that just because the resources on Chaplin are so immense. I mean, nobody can ever really fully explore the archive, which is all online. The great archive, which is in Switzerland, but is online via the Cineteca di Bologna, which has done huge service to Chaplin.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in other words, you're saying greatness was thrust upon you.
Well, okay, yes.
Well, Hooman, in the control room, do we have any folks who might like to ask their own question?
We have a few questions. There's two ways to ask questions. You can either raise your hand and we can unmute you, or we can ask you to be unmuted. So it's a two-step process. We'll ask you to unmute and then you'll have to unmute yourself. Or if you prefer, you can type questions in the Q&A. I see some questions are coming in through the chat, but if you have a burning, there's a lot going on in the chat. So if you have a burning question and it's not addressed, please feel free to repeat it in the Q&A. We have, let's see, some written questions. An anonymous attendee says, if there were another movie to be made about Chaplin's life and it only had to focus on one period of his life, which period do you think is most interesting and why?
That's a question for you, probably, David.
The films are wonderful, but in some ways, I think that the theatrical period is before he went into films is you know, we know least about it, but I mean, it's very, very fascinating. I'd love to know more about his you know, his touring days with the Carnot Company and with Sherlock Holmes. But you know, he was peculiarly lucky, wasn't he? I mean, well, his talent helped him, but I mean, the idea that, you know, at 15 years old, he could get a part with in London's West End with the great American star, William Gillette, as the page boy in Sherlock Holmes, and made it his own, and really made something of that part. But you know, 15, you know, he had a very rough childhood, but by 15 he was being really quite lucky.
Okay, our friend in France, Dominique dugros, has a question that he wants to ask himself. So I will unmute you, Dominique, and you have to unmute yourself and feel free to ask the question. Dominique, you have to click the button to allow your microphone on. There you go.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi everybody.
But can't we see you?
No, we can't see him.
Oh, that's sad. Yeah.
Just hearing is enough. Do you consider it is a burden for you to be considered to the official, I mean into brackets, official Chaplin's biographer? Or is it a privilege?
I'm not, because I had a tough time signing the contract with it, finally, because Miss Ford, who ran the Chaplin estate, as I say, was an absolute dragon, and we sat hours with the lawyers working out the contract. She said, "We don't want you to write a spicy book." No, I'm not going to write a spicy book. It's not really my style. But yes. So and I think, I don't know whether it's whether it was just in discussion, but I mean, the idea was not, this is the authorized, not the authorized biography. This is your biography, and you know, it's not authorized. It's not an official biography. I mean, I think it's become that way, and I know that they value it and use it. I shouldn't really tell this story, but it's a lovely story because Geraldine I adore and admire, and we've sometimes done tours and press conferences and things together. And I'm always amazed because she just knows so much. I mean, when she, people ask her, whatever the film is we're presenting, they ask things, and her knowledge is tremendous. And I want to say to her, you're amazing, Geraldine. You just know all these things. He said, don't be silly. I'll just read the chapter of your book before I come. Which is very, very sweet, flattering, very, very frank of her.
David, we've had another question from one of the people who is not a Chaplin, that knowledgeable about Chaplin, a friend of mine named Pat McArdle, who wants to know what the connection is between Chaplin and Louise Brooks. Would you like to explain that?
No.
All right.
I'm discreet. Wait a minute, where is it described? I'm not sure. I think I'm very above board.
You think what?
I think I treated it very, very, very respectful and very respectful way. You don't go into, even if you write biographies, you don't go into people's bedrooms. So there we are. And I think somewhere Louise has described it. Yeah.
She has. She, in her book of essays called Lulu in Hollywood, she has a chapter about her time with Charlie. And I can fill in a little bit of things of this without I think offending your sensibilities. Which is that when he went to New York to premiere The Gold Rush,
yes, yeah,
he was having at the same time a exhilarating artistic triumph because The Gold Rush blew everybody away, as it continues to do, but a nightmarish home life because he embarked on a
yes.
very, very unhappy marriage with his second wife, Lita Gray. And he stayed in New York, he stayed on, and somebody introduced him to Louise Brooks, who was at that time working for the Follies, I believe. And they embarked on a rather torrid life of nightlife, of going to the clubs and just, I think he stayed for a couple of months, and they had what she describes very fondly as an exhilarating and of course, you have to realize, for one thing, at this point, Louise was not very well known at this point at all. She was a chorus girl, but Charlie was literally the house guest of the era. Royalty would be traveling from abroad to visit the United States. As today, they want to go to Disneyland. Then they wanted to meet Douglas Fairbanks and Charlie Chaplin. He was a consummate party guest, entertainer, by all accounts, able to turn, pretty soon the party would just be standing in a circle around him as he would go on sometimes for hours with comic improvisations and stories that we hear tantalizing glimpses of in literature. And Louise describes a number of them too, including one where he showed there was another couple who they were hanging out with, and he suddenly did a version of a Ziegfeld Follies girl, and she burst into tears because
yes.
She knew he was doing her, and she resolved not to be that girl. And he was, of course, he was stricken. He did not want to hurt her feelings. He was doing what he did with everybody, which was to lampoon them mercilessly and skewer them in the same way that he skewers a minister in The Pilgrim. So that's who Louise Brooks was to Charlie. And she wrote very, very fondly of him in various places.
Somewhere she wrote much more intimately, didn't she?
Yes, she was quite explicit in her book about her own very, we today, in the era of Me Too, we think of men as the sort of sexually voracious predators. But, don't forget, in the 20s, Freud had just taken hold, his ideas, and in sophisticated circles, if you weren't having a fairly active romantic life or sex life, as you might put it, you were considered in danger of imploding, of having a kind of nightmarish inhibitions that result in neurosis and hysteria. Hysteria was a very popular disease, which doesn't really exist anymore. People having hysterical paralysis, women in the turn of the century and things, and I presume men as well. And so Freud exploded a lot of that by introducing the notion that there are forces within us that we may not be in quite as good control as we'd like to pretend. And Louise, that expressed itself in the 20s in this rush of abandon. The Roaring Twenties gets its name partially from that sense of liberation and freedom, roles changing between what a woman's proper's behavior would be, what a man's, and so on. Anyway, I don't want to take away from our talk together, but that's the answer to your question, Pat.
But sure, they made a lovely couple.
Yeah.
Wonderful couple.
Why don't we try to alternate between the verbal questions and the written questions? So we'll go back to an audio question, and I'll just bring them up in the order in which they were asked. So the next up is on the verbal questions is Christopher. So I am allowing you to talk, and you have to unmute your microphone. So Christopher.
Thank you. I have a question for both of you. I've recently gone through all the Keystone films again, but this time watching them in the context of other Keystone films of the period to see exactly what made Charlie different. And in watching Tilly's Punctured Romance this time, I was struck by how much his interaction with Marie Dressler is identical to that with Martha Ray. And it occurs to me that perhaps Chaplin arrived fully formed as an actor to film, and then developed character and technique, the cinematic technique, in the time that would take anybody else to become a better actor. Just an impression that's come to me recently, and I'd love to know what you two think of this theory.
I'm not quite sure what you're saying.
I can explain further. The way that Charlie interacts with Marie Dressler in Tilly's Punctured Romance is nearly identical to how he interacts with Martha Ray. The performance is so subtle and so good. It is he is well aware that we are well aware of the problems he's having controlling this person. With the slightest gesture, he brings us into him. And I thought, my God, he's almost completely developed as an actor in his first year at Keystone. And I wondered if you would have what your view of that would be, if you would agree or disagree.
I would agree. I mean, you can't see the moment where you decide, oh, he's fully developed. But he really right from the start, you do see just this incredible great actor, and in a way you feel he couldn't help it. I don't know. I mean, apart from the very first, I mean, he seems so complete. The films around him are rougher, but he is amazingly complete in what he does.
If I may bring it back to
after Kid, I mean, Kid Auto Races, he's not the greatest of actors, but he's funny.
Well, Kid Auto Races, don't forget, David, he didn't know how they were going to cut it together, and they only really had one gag, and they just repeated it. He probably thought it would be a 2-minute film. He's in front of the camera, and the guy pushes him away. That's the only gag, but it's repeated with, 10 or 11 times, just like he goes upstairs in 1 a.m. And I would bring it back to Gene. What's the name of that newspaper reporter, Gene somebody, who wrote Those Big Eyes, Those Big Shoes Are Buttoned with 50 million eyes.
Yes.
That was of the Keystone period, and we've had a great gift given to us by the many people who have worked for many years to find the best available prints of the Keystones before they all disappear, because they were all they were considered obsolete after a while, and so they went through many hands, were mutilated. The original negatives are all gone, and so through a worldwide effort conducted by a number of great film archivists and organizations, we have this Keystone set that came out, I think, in 2010. And it's a revelation. It's literally the first time they've had decent soundtracks on them. And some of the films are much more complete than anything that's been out there, including Tilly, which looked like a great mishmash until you had seen this latest thing. And even in the early ones, when you see a good print of Kid Auto Races, and even I would say Mabel's Strange Predicament. I was just looking at that recently, and one of our other presenters, Nigel Dreiner, is going to be doing a presentation specifically on a Mabel's Strange Predicament. And I was amazed at how good and solid his performance. He does a number of bits. He was told, do something in the hotel lobby. The star is Mabel. She's going to walk past you. So he gets tangled in her dog leash. But then he does this whole series of things with a sort of rocking chair and a spittoon, which is so well conceived, like a classic comic routine, that it's quite wonderful. And then he was, of course, dealing with what other people were bringing to the table. I just noticed you keep getting revelations looking at these things that his director, who he really didn't get along with, his first director, Pathé Henry Lehrman, is standing in the lobby in the first shot, which was Charlie's first shot that we have extant of him as the tramp in Mabel's Strange Predicament. He's just standing in the lobby glaring at him.
I didn't know that.
Into the business and essentially and in Kid Auto Race, I just want to say one more thing, David, which is that and Dominique, which is in Kid Auto, it's not Dominique who asked this, in Kid Auto Races, it's a remarkable film because it's simultaneously a fictional film and a documentary about the birth of Charlie Chaplin, because we are seeing we're at a real event. We're at a real event, these Soapbox Derby.
These are the first people in the world to see him.
And there's one man who shoos him away, who doesn't appear to be an actor at all. He seems to be really annoyed that Charlie is getting in the way of these cars rushing past, that he's causing some danger or distracting the crowd. And you watch the crowd get more and more engaged by seeing him. And by the end, there are all these kids who are grinning at him and just staring at him.
It's interesting. The kids are the first ones to get it. They're ahead of the grown-ups. They get it very quickly.
It's such a fascinating film in that context. Thanks for that question. That's a great question.
A great question. But I mean, the thing is, obviously, he did arrive with tremendous equipment. I mean, what he'd learned starring in the Carno company. I mean, he got everything there, really. The films just had to get better, and his relation with the film had to get better. But he arrived pretty well fully formed.
Well, I did a commentary for the BFI, a couple of the BFI mutual re-releases, including 1 AM. And going back through the Keystones, I realized that we think, okay, he's just onto this genius level, and he's doing things that have never been done before. He's doing some of those stair falls in some of the very first Keystones, this very same stair, which tells me that he was not improvising that on the Keystone set. These are very practiced falls that he would kill himself, if he hadn't rehearsed them and done them on stage for years. This is Carno material, I think, that he then in 1 AM brought to its apotheosis. So a lot of the roots for much of what he did later are there in the Keystones. It's often dismissed in books as journeyman work because every company fits so neatly into a kind of a progressive thing, but it's not that simple a story. He was.
The films have to get better. He doesn't. He knows very well what he's doing. Yeah.
Any other questions from our attendees?
Let's switch back to a written question. William has two. I think you answered the first one in your book, but I'll give them both to you. Was Chaplin himself a great letter writer? And the second question is, where did you most frequently encounter his voice?
Sorry, encounter his voice.
Encounter his voice, yes.
He certainly wasn't a great letter writer. He to the end of his life, he had some difficulty in writing and spelling. I mean, the script of The Freak very often, you can see what he means, but if necessary, he invents how to spell a word. And I mean, yes, when he was writing scripts, he wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, but he wrote very, very few letters. What was the other question?
Where did you encounter his voice? Where did you most frequently encounter his voice?
Well, in the films. I mean, there weren't, you know, by the time I had the opportunity to meet him, he was, as I say, a basic, and we only got 6 words here or there, but sometimes there are broadcasts. Oh, yes, a wonderful broadcast that he made in the war about his. It's quite short. It's about his memories of London, and you know, he's writing. He's speaking to London at war, and just his feelings about London.
Was it broadcast on the very streets? Was it broadcast over the radio, or was it broadcast on loudspeakers on the streets?
No, I don't think, I never heard that.
Okay. It's in a documentary, that was a British documentary called Our Charlie.
Oh, that's...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yes, yes. Yeah, which has got some other good material in, some material that's now lost, I think. And then, oh, when he came to London for the premiere of Limelight, and on the journey discovered that he was not going to go back to America, there's a beautiful a BBC broadcast. It exists, and he sat down with 4 critics or journalists or somebody and talked to them. And it's beautiful, but the line I remember particularly is when someone says, "Mr. Chaplin, does it embarrass you when people call you a genius?" And he said, no, 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 no. There are so many of us in Hollywood. Very nice. He was very quick thinking, I must say.
Now we're going to continue with this, but I would like to take a little pause because I have a little surprise for you, David. As I told you, the people in at Niles have been, you know, restoring the film legacy, and a recently discovered outtake. They've recently come up with an outtake that I suspect you will never see, and I'd like to share it with you all now. I'll do it with a share screen so everybody can see it.
That's lovely. That's a wicked one.
David, happy birthday. I'm the only one who knows that your birthday is not today, but it's coming up in August, a milestone birthday.
August is the 90th one. So I've got to sort of start laughing again, haven't I?
Well, I must say you're in wonderful voice and shape, and it's so wonderful that you are still around. I wanted to share that with everybody because we've been on for an hour, which is not, if you're willing to stay with us a few minutes more, I know more people have questions, but I didn't want anybody who might have to leave to miss that little celebration from the
that's lovely. Thank you so much, everybody. Yes, yes.
That video was put together by our good friend Jason Allen, who is a wonderful, does wonderful Chaplin portraiture. It's impersonation is too superficial a word to use for it. And Jason and I will be doing a program at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a big Chaplin project we're announcing. You'll be in bed, I hope, because England. So that would be about well, it's only about
2 hours from now.
Yeah, it's about 9 o'clock. You could.
Oh, no, I won't be in bed.
Well, you're welcome to join us. So let's.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. I thought that was beautiful. Thank you very much indeed. And yes, and as I say, you know, I think when you come, I'm not frightened of being 90. I'm just thinking now. Wait a minute. Now what do I do? I've got plans.
Well, you've got one book you said you've planned on the Freak. Do you have other books in the pipeline, as it were?
I'm doing one actually. Well, you know, with the lockdown, everybody's writing books. Apparently, the publishers are being three times as many books as any normal time. But I'm doing a funny book. It's working. I think it's working out quite well. It was. You know. Okay. So, I have actually witnessed 10 decades. I witnessed the 30s, saw my first film, the 30s, things like that, and now I'm witnessing the 20s. And so I thought I'd do the idea is an innocent bystander watching 10 decades. I didn't time it very well because I came in with the Great Depression, and I'm not going out, but I've arrived at the great pandemic. So so my 10 decades have quite an embrace, but I hope it will be funny.
David, I must mention that our chat room is being flooded with happy birthday wishes from all our participants today, many including our Japanese friends who did make it, Ono, Hiroyuki Ono, and Shunichi Okubo. Sorry for angling your name.
Are they not with us? Are they not with us?
They are with us. They're here. They are watching from.
Oh, they're watching. Oh, yeah.
From their
hello. Hello, both of you.
Yes.
All of you.
So, any other?
Should we do another live question?
Sure.
Pat has a question for you, so I'll put him on. Or her, I don't know. Let's see, Pat.
Hello.
Hello, Pat. You're on.
Yes. Hi. I was wondering about Chaplin's friend Gillette, the actor from, and he had the Gillette Castle in Connecticut that I've been to.
Oh, really? Ah.
And Chaplin used to go there quite a bit, I guess.
Did he? That's funny because I don't know anything at all about whether Chaplin ever made contact with him when he was in America.
Well, this Gillette had a miniature railroad that he put around the castle, and I believe they had a lot of fun riding with that.
Oh, that's really interesting to know. I absolutely did not know that he had any contact with him.
Well, I'll pass it along to Dan Kamin, anything I find out, and we've been thoroughly enjoying.
No, anything you found out, because Gillette himself is a fascinating character, and you know, have you seen the film, Gillette's film of the film of Gillette's Sherlock Holmes?
The Castle?
Well, Sherlock Holmes.
No, he won't have seen that. So let me intervene, gentlemen. For everybody else, we're talking about William Gillette, who was a fabulously successful actor-manager, American actor-manager, who had some hit plays, so much so, one of his plays was called The Secret Service, about spies during the Civil War, but he was prolific, and so much so that when Conan Doyle's agent asked him to write a play about Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle was not considered up to the job. What he produced was not considered good in theatrical terms. So they got William Gillette, the American, to collaborate with him, and he wrote the very first play about Sherlock Holmes, which debuted about 1902 in London. And when Charlie was about 12 years old and desperately hunting for a job in theater, he was cast in the play, in not Gillette's original production, but in a road company, because it was so popular. It toured literally the world, not only with Gillette, with other people, just like a Broadway show will have road companies now. And this ran for many years. In fact, some years ago, I missed it. They did it at the Shaw Festival up in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Canada. Anyway, Chaplin toured with the show for 4 years. That was his main legitimate theater experience. And he loved acting out to the end of his days. He would, I just read somewhere where he acted out literally the second 2 acts of the play, doing everybody's role. And he fell hard in love, probably for the first time, with Gillette's leading lady, so much so that he doesn't really say much about Gillette, who everybody was fascinated with, but this stunning beauty named Marie Doro. And he just would contrive to be on the stairs that as she would pass him on the way to the stage between scenes every night. And she never even, she just nodded politely, and his heart was beating. He describes it in a very funny and eloquent way. And when she later met him as a major star in Hollywood, she had no memory of him. But he, of course, was thrilled that she was thrilled to meet that Charlie Chaplin. So, you know, everything comes back to Charlie Chaplin. It's one of the endlessly fascinating things of how his life and career entwines with so much of cultural history. Who would have thought he had a connection with Sherlock Holmes and the very first Sherlock Holmes stage adaptation, and the great American trooping actor, William Gillette?
Yes, it's, just a few years ago, they just rediscovered actually it was the printed in Paris, a film which Gillette made of Sherlock Holmes. Very, very complete rendition of the play. And he is wonderful. I mean, even subtitled, he's quite wonderful. And of course, another boy is playing Billy. But when you look at the boy, he's not bad, and you think, oh, maybe some of Charlie's inventions had gone into the role.
You know, David, it was
looking at it's on DVD. It's rather expensive on DVD, but you can get it.
David, I don't know if you're aware that Conan Doyle only had, I think there were 2 rules. One was that no romantic interest, no love interest for Holmes. He never wanted Holmes to have a love interest. And Gillette promptly put a leading lady love interest, played by Marie Doro originally, in the play. And actually, I don't know if she was the very first, but when he returned to London, where he picked up Charlie, because he asked, who's the best page boy of the trooping companies? There were about 2 or 3 of them, and everybody said, oh yeah, it's this Chaplin boy, who was by then 16, but he looked about 10, because he was always very small at his age. And but love interest, romance, marriage was all in that play. And Conan Doyle didn't have a thing to do with it. He was just very happily raking in the dough, because this became a very international success, a theater blockbuster of the period.
Let's take another written question. Eli is asking about the discarded rushes that take place in a bowling alley. He says it's a mutual idea. I think it's from the Idol class, though. Is that not correct? Those rushes of him in the bowling alley that were never used in the film.
Sorry, what's it?
Have you seen the footage of Charlie bowling ever, where there's a bald man and he does some business mistaking the bald man's head for a ball and thing?
They're among the outtakes.
A bowling alley?
Yeah, they're in the they're among the outtakes, but they're not included in Unknown Chapter.
I don't remember them.
Yeah, I think they're outtakes from the Idol class, but
yeah. Yeah, he's in the idol class, the same sort of outfit as the idol class. They're very
Oh.
nice. You know, you can see him just as you do on a lot of films. The new, I had the great privilege, David. I never told you this, that they put together some of the outtakes of the cafe scene from the circus. The
Oh
scene,
yes, yes.
6 hours of unedited. They were never edited. Charlie didn't. Kevin
Mm.
edited for his, but they did the unedited outtakes of him building up the walk to the cafe and
Oh, the fish lady.
all the fish business and the
Yes.
but you know, not as Kevin put it together. They just Abby Lustgarten from Criterion Films wanted that to be narrated, and so I narrated about a half hour, and it was a wonderful experience. She put them together very skillfully, so you can watch, as in Unknown Chaplin, you watch how he shapes through performance after performance, take after take. I mean,
Yes.
scenes till he's gotten his scene right, and you can really see it in those outtakes. And I know that Rachel Ford begged him to include it in the 1969 release because she loved the outtakes from this. And Charlie, for some reason we don't know, he didn't do it. And you know, I saw a newsreel film recently, probably Hooman sent it to me, of people surrounding him at Vevey upon the release of the circus, the re-release in 1969, and he was very distressed. He talked about it was during the whole period where his second marriage exploded, and he lost about 20 pounds, which was a lot of. And he says in this, you know, in this thing in 1969, he says, "Oh yes, I looked terrible. I was down to 117." He actually remembered how far, because I'm sure everybody around him was very alarmed. And if you look at it, it's the scenes where he's eavesdropping on Myrna as she's speaking to her fortune teller, and he's very, very gaunt in those scenes. You can see it's quite visible. He lost a lot of weight, and Raleigh Totherow claimed that his hair turned white overnight when the headlines hit about what was then the most lurid and financially extravagant divorce settlement in American history. That was before. That was during the battle through the headlines. So anyway, it's back to the questions.
Okay, we've got questions.
No, just
Go ahead,
one.
David.
Oh wait,
Sorry.
wait 1 second.
Just one thing. I mean, you look at the kid, and it's so perfect. He's having just as much trouble there, and they were trying to get hold of the negative away from him. You know.
That's right.
And it's when you see either of those films, the thing, just what trouble he was having, he's amazing. I mean, I think the two parts of his life were, I think when he got into the film, I think the other all went. It's extraordinary.
It is amazing when you look at the circus. I've always been stunning to me because I feel the circus, the first 20 minutes are just as good as anything he ever did.
Oh.
They're just like a burst of joy to see them.
Yeah.
And if somebody has never seen Chaplin, if I'm talking with a group of college students in a classroom where everybody's sitting in their desks and they're restless, I'll show them that, and their attention is riveted. But to the earlier question, I think your compulsion to write more, my compulsion to have done the same, and keep being involved with Chaplin projects is right from the beginning. You know, you simply can't take your eyes off him. Something that's that cannot be ultimately captured in words or a tribute or and any other, because it would be like trying to describe a Beethoven symphony if you've never heard it in words. You can't do it. You can only experience it direct. And how wonderful that it's so purely visual, and it's a level of visual thinking and visual sophistication and visual humor that just has not been really achieved, although some people might differ. But to me, they're two sides of the same coin. I love them both.
You were mentioning the number of books that David's written. I think there's one other person who, living in this world, who challenges him for the title of most books written about Chaplin. And since he's up at an ungodly hour right now, he wanted to come in and briefly wish you happy birthday. So I'm going to pull him into the discussion. Oops. Try it again. Hold on. Let's see if we can bring him in. No, I can't bring you in. It's Ono, but well, let me see. Let me see if
I guess who it was. Yeah.
Let me see if I can at least allow him to talk, because he wanted to wish you happy birthday.
Oh yes, am I in now?
Oh, you're in now. Yes.
Hello. Oh no.
No video though.
No video, but anyway, so just to let you know that Ty is also watching you.
Oh, marvelous. Ah, wonderful. Ah.
Yeah, nice watching this, and you're safe and okay, and your shape, and I'm so glad to see you.
Safe and okay, except I have to admit that I thought this was happening tomorrow and that this was just a little rehearsal. But anyway, I hope we got away with it.
So which of the two
family, Ono? How is
which of the two of you have written more books about Chaplin? I'm always confused. It's a pretty tight race.
Oh no, Ono has definitely, and he's written the play and the musical. I know he's done everything.
Mm.
Oh, thank you very much.
And I was always fascinated with the fact that you had a festival in Japan devoted to Chaplin. Always had Japanese employees at his studio and in his household, and one of them was named Kono. His
yes, Kono.
At first his chauffeur, and then later his major domo, as it were. And so you sponsored the Ono Kono Festival. Always fascinating.
Yes.
And brought
sometimes
him to attention of the world, which is wonderful, because he was one of Chaplin's most intimate contacts in life. He was with him for what, 25 years, close to 25 years. They worked together.
18 years.
18 years. Thank you.
Yes. Mm.
I'm asking the right guy.
You are. Yes.
Let's ask another question. We have Lincoln, who's been waiting for a while to ask a live question. So let me allow him to talk.
Is this Abraham Lincoln?
No.
He heard me mention the Civil War, and he probably came back to talk with us.
Mm-hmm.
That's an American conflict, David. Pay no attention.
Okay, can you hear us, Lincoln?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I'm wondering what you think about Peter Ackroyd's A Brief Life. Yeah, okay. Let me do this. What do you think about Peter Ackroyd's book, A Brief Life of Charlie Chaplin? Have you read that, or do you have opinion on it?
I haven't. I've seen it. I haven't read it. I think I'll pass on that one. I mean, I think that he's sort of. No, I'll pass on it. I'm not going to talk about other biographers.
I will. I'll say something. I have read the book, and I liked it very much. He has some very good insights, and the thing that was particularly striking to me is when he talks about Chaplin returning to England in 1921 for the first time since he had left from 1910, and coming back, of course, as a superstar, as we would now call it. But at that time, there were no words for what he had become. And Ackroyd is very eloquent about that. He said, the crowds, I've never gotten a good estimate of how many people really turned out to greet him as the boat train docked in London from Southampton. But it was compared, the crowds were compared to the armistice. And Ackroyd says, this was something, this kind of attention for an actor was something unprecedented in human history, and Chaplin had no way of dealing with it, because neither he nor anybody else had ever had to cope with adulation and fame on this level, and that he would spend the rest of his life figuring out how to do it. And I think it was a wonderful encapsulation.
Well, maybe I'll go back to it. I think I was put off before because he was. I sort of started, and he was sort of paying serious attention to the Born in a Gypsy Caravan story, and so I think I put it down there.
I think it's worth reading. I don't think I must say, David, I've never read a book on Chaplin that I didn't enjoy to some degree. I mean, you obviously are in a different category, and as you can see, my copy of your book, if you look, is full of bookmarks because I'm continually referring to it because, of course, I'm like you, endlessly fascinated and doing things, you know, doing projects related to it. And I should mention and publicly acknowledge that some of you out there may know that I taught Robert Downey to be Charlie Chaplin for his performance in the Richard Attenborough bio movie. That's a job I wouldn't have gotten if David had not recommended me for it, and for which I now publicly thank you. It was a dream come true, of course. And the movie, as you all know, probably, or maybe some of you don't, was based on David's pioneering book, simply because it is the most comprehensive and factually rich book that was ever written on Chaplin. But everybody seems to have their own spin. It's this dilemma. You cannot encapsulate what the man's fascination with any more than we can do it with Shakespeare or Mozart or Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo or George Gershwin, who was, I've always thought, along with Chaplin, the prime party guest of the 1920s. If you had Gershwin at your party, pretty soon everybody would be around the piano listening to his latest stuff. And can you imagine being there? And he loved it. As he said himself, when I'm not playing, I don't have a good time. And with Charlie, it was the same thing. When I'm not making people laugh, I just don't have as good a time, even though he felt that he was a shy man, but he certainly learned how to be the consummate guest. So, and I can imagine a sequence, if we were doing another movie about Charlie, I can imagine a scene in which Charlie and Gershwin are at the same party, which I think happened. And again, you know, this kind of sparks that might have been happening because of the presence of Paulette Goddard, who had a very interesting romantic life herself.
Just an odd thing, this is not relevant to anything really, but I've never thought much about Sherlock Holmes except that. But during this period, just before I go to bed, every night I look at an endless series of Sherlock Holmes stories. And done for TV, 26 minutes each, and they're terribly good. It's a young actor called Ronald Howard who plays him, who is the son of Trevor Howard. And I suddenly looked at one which is called Lady Beryl, and there was the usual English TV cast, but the Lady Beryl was done by someone else that I vaguely recognized, a person of real style. And then I pointed the credits at the end, and it was Paulette Goddard. You know, an English TV play in 1955.
Wow.
It's worth looking at that. They're all on YouTube. It's worth looking at them. They're about, I don't know, about 50 of them.
Huh.
They're very good, and he's a very nice Sherlock, I must say.
Huh. Thanks for the tip. Any other questions out there?
Actually, there's a lot of questions. I'm just looking at the time, though. How we've got at least 18 open questions written. How much more time do you want to?
Why don't we take about 10 more minutes and then let David go? Are you good for 10 more minutes, David? Are you okay? Are you fine?
Yes, I think so. I think I can survive. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah,
Risen to the occasion. I thank you. I know we caught you unaware. I did not deliberately do this to ensure spontaneity. I promise I did not misinform you that it was not going to be today.
Well, I think it's probably good. I don't know. I can't speak myself, but it seemed all right. It seemed off the cuff.
We'll let them be the judge of that. Let's hear the questions.
Oh, yes.
Okay, we're just going through the questions in order. So sorry if we don't get to yours. Just going in the order submitted. Christine asked, Have you ever written something in a book that you later found out was wrong? And if so, how did you address it?
I'm sure I am. There's a very considerable mistake in most of the most editions of the Chaplin book. I will tell you now. I mean, I suppose my first big moment for Chaplin was when Chaplin came to London for the premiere of Limelight. And I was an extremely poor student, but from somewhere I got the money to buy a ticket for the premiere, to rent a dinner suit to wear, to have a hotel, and the train from Cambridge back is a big expenditure. I know that the ticket cost a guinea. So it was a big undertaking, but it was worth it, because there we were, it was Chaplin and the beautiful Una, this magical thing. So this was really a big moment of my life, the premiere of Limelight. And if you go to most editions of the book, I've got the wrong date for it in the chronology at the end.
Is that true of this book too, or had you corrected?
No, it's the right year, but the wrong date.
Even in this book?
It's in the very latest editions, it's corrected. So that is something that that's an error which stayed for a long time and was finally corrected. But it's a very peculiar error in that it was, that date was a marvelous date for me. And I got it wrong.
Okay, Tony is asking about your interest in the FBI involvement in Chaplin and the paternity trial. I know you wrote an article about it, but weren't you working on a longer piece about that?
Yes, I mean, it's funny. You have ideas and then they go. Because I think it's not so different. When there was the Freedom of Information Act, and I was able to acquire the FBI files, which now I have in digital, and my originals are in Bologna. But apart from all the stuff that is blacked out, there's some incredible things in there. And I think that what I really wanted to do was the Joan Barry case, the paternity case, and how that was absolutely being stage managed from the FBI. Everything that happened in the court was produced and stage managed by the FBI. There was, for instance, a marvelous thing where, the FBI organized who were going to be the judges. And for one of the sessions, they got, one of the trials, one of the cases, they'd chosen their judge. And they suddenly discovered that the judge had once spent a pleasant afternoon himself with Joan Barry. And in part token of his appreciation, he'd given her a book which he'd written and inscribed to her. It was a book called Banking in Boston. So suddenly this was horror for the FBI, and they had, she wasn't terribly interested in a book on banking in Boston. She'd left it in the lodging house where she then lodged, and the FBI organized a break-in to retrieve this book. It's not clear whether they actually got it or not, but that's the extent to which that paternity suit, or that series of suits, was totally stage managed, every move by the FBI. And I did have a plan to do that, and to sort of compare the newspaper reports with what was going on back at the FBI. Mr. Hoover, Mr. Hoover was deeply interested in this case. So that was a plan which I won't ever get around to now, but that was something I wanted to do. I've got all the material. I could do it. Yeah, that's something to do when you get to be 90. That's probably the thing to do.
We have another live question, but it's a repeat questioner. It's Dominique, so I'll allow him to ask a
Go to
second.
Dominique, yes.
Okay, let's bring Dominique in again.
Yeah. What is your opinion about the gypsy ancestry? Michael Chaplin seems to believe it very much. What is your opinion about that?
Oh, well, I mean, if you go through it, you know, she was on very good terms with her husband. He was, when he was born, her husband was in Hull, which is much easier to get to than to the other side of the country. Why would a pregnant woman get on a bike, on a train and make an extremely difficult journey to get into a gypsy caravan? The whole story is nonsense, and you know, factually you can see all sorts of mistakes. You know, he says that. Wait a minute, that Hannah had performed in her father's circus, but her father didn't have a circus, he was a bootmaker. So a journalist found it, and he took it to the Sunday Times, I think it was, and a journalist from the Sunday Times rang me and said, what is your opinion? What do you think about this? And I said, well, it makes no sense at all. This couldn't be, and no, I mean, I wouldn't publish it. And then he called me and said, sorry to have to tell you, but the editor says he likes the story as it is, so they're going to go ahead with it. And so that's gone down to history. And Michael, who is a beautiful man, but he just was totally taken by this, just as a romantic. I don't think it's a very romantic story, but he thought it was a very romantic story, and so he's gone along with it. We disagree, but in a very friendly way.
Thank you.
What do you think of the story?
What do I think?
Yes. Does it convince you in any way?
No, I'm not convinced at all. I've read the newspapers from Hull with Charles Spencer Senior playing in Hull when Chaplin was born. It's a problem with internet and with all those news that are spread on the net without any verification, any control. So that's very, very difficult to struggle against those fake news.
Yes, and gets into new biographies very well.
But David, if he wasn't a gypsy, then why does he play the Hungarian goulash in The Vagabond?
But his one of his grandmothers was a gypsy, wasn't she? She was a Miss Smith. He had gypsy blood in him. Yes, he had Romany blood, but not that particular bit of it.
So we have another question, Who, before we let David go?
Okay, let's squeeze it.
Can I? Sorry. Can I ask?
Oh
yeah. Yeah. I'm now working on Chaplin Disney, and I think Charlie Chaplin had a big influence on Walt Disney. And could you please tell us about Chaplin's influence on Walt Disney?
No, I can't. But I mean, I think it would be a very. I think it would be irresistible. I mean, you know, the very visual performance would be something which was important to an animator, and a very dear friend of mine who died, unfortunately died last year, was the animator Richard Williams. He was a neighbor of mine at the moment, and we saw a lot together in his last years. We spent a lot of time together. Great animator, had a number of a number of Oscars, like, for instance, for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. He did the animation for that. And he was still working when he died. But he never missed a film in Pordenone because he said that silent cinema is immensely important for an animator, and of course, Chaplin is the most visual actor. So I don't know specifically about the influence on Disney, but there had to be. It is impossible that there was not an influence.
I'm sure he affected his politics, didn't he, David? Disney's politics. Chaplin influenced Disney's politics for sure, right?
Yeah.
I
don't think so.
No,
I think you got that wrong.
Well, a few years ago at the festival in Bologna, there was a Disney animator who gave a talk and talked about how they showed Chaplin films by way of training the new animators. And I was contacted by a Disney animator some years ago about the same thing because of one of the books that I wrote, which talks about his movement. And I've always had the impression they had a tremendous respect for each other. And it's probably a grudging one on Charlie's part, simply because much of the sort of excitement of silent movie comedy was directly imported into, of course, those great animated films. We see gag after gag, except, one of the great pleasures of silent comedy with real people was the illusion that people were elastic and weren't hurt by falling off buildings or doing the incredible. I mentioned about the falls before. There's a scene in a very early, I think it's his favorite pastime, where Charlie is drunk. He comes home drunk to his boarding house, and he walks halfway up a stairwell, and then sort of turns his back and falls backward over the railing onto a little settee, a little bench, sitting up, and he's got a cigarette in his hand, and he falls somehow with his knees crossed, and he strikes the match he'd been holding which is the reason why he fell, because he's gone off balance and he completes the act of lighting the cigarette, after he's fallen, and it's hair weight. I mean, he's literally tumbling backwards. And another thing I often think of is, you look at those keystones, and of course Charlie very famously said to Max Sennett when he was negotiating a higher salary or more artistic control, he said, "Look, all I need to make a comedy is a park, a pretty girl, and a policeman," right? And I often think that try going out to a park with a couple of your friends and your iPhone and see if you can do something funny with that. And he does it again and again and again. And it's with whatever reason. I mean, later he was in elaborate fun houses and built sets, but at first he's just in the park. He's just at the race. Do something funny. Do something funny.
Yes.
And he does.
Well, I mean, anything he lays his hands on can turn into a joke. Yeah. Mm.
Absolutely. Well, I think I speak for everybody who is here when I say, on behalf of all of us and the Niles Essanay Silent Film Museum, a very happy birthday upcoming in the next 2 months to you, David. And thank you so much for the many great gifts you have given to all of us who love Chaplin as you do. And we hope we're looking forward to the books yet to come. It seems you have to be with us for quite some time to come, because there's a lot more.
That's my plan.
Yeah. Well done. Well done. And Godspeed, stay safe. And thank you all for stopping in and visiting with David and I here, and welcoming David to our virtual conference at the Niles Essanay Silent Film Museum Chaplin Days celebration.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye, David.
Bye.